Utah making its first appearance at 9-3, taking on Washington, looking for a second Pac-12 championship in 3 seasons. We've got Shane Roberts from Block U. It's the SB Nation platform for Utah athletics on the line. Shane, how you doing tonight?
Good. How about you, Mark?
I'm doing great. It's great to have you back here at Mark Rogers TV. Shane used to join us a number of times as we had a show that we would launch each and every Wednesday night, Pac-12 breakdown, and we'd kick it around with a number of Pac-12 bloggers. So, of course, your Utes have made it to the Pac-12 championship game for the first time. I know that before we get to that there was a whole lot riding on Saturday night's game. Trailing 20-0, making that valiant comeback, completing that was important to you and the throngs of people in the state of Utah, because as we've discussed many times, I know that it's an important rivalry, and people around the country know it as, okay, Utah, BYU, they're rivals, but don't grasp the intensity and the football style hate between the two teams. So if you can give us a feel for some of the rhetoric before and after the game and how the game played out, and just how much that means to Utah, in addition to going to the Pac-12 championship game, which of course was already wrapped up.
Yeah, it's the Utah BYU rivalry has evolved dramatically since Utah's moved to the Pac-12, and BYU is now an independent. So the level of importance of the game has really shifted. It's an important game for Utah in terms that it is an in-state rivalry, so it's always good to win the state championship. But big picture-wise, the game really isn't that important because, as you alluded to, Utah already had the Pac-12 South locked up. The Pac-12 championship game a week later. Whereas with BYU, they're just trying to schedule almost anybody and everybody that they can get scheduled. So they need everybody they can get. And since Utah's now won 8 consecutive games in the series, they want to beat Utah any way possible. So they're approaching desperation. Amongst the fans, it's a really interesting dynamic because a lot of Utah fans, I'm not sure what the split is, but I know plenty of them would like to see the series not necessarily stop. There is a group that would like to see it stop because they like to troll BYU fans and say that you're not important enough to play anymore. But there's a large contingent that would like to see kind of a rotating series between BYU and Utah State, and kind of spread that around, since we only get 3 non-conference games outside of the 9 conference games. But for that particular game, it's always fun to beat those guys down there, because during the Lavelle Edwards years, obviously, he went on a giant tear. He beat Utah year after year after year. But starting in about 1993, Ron McBride started to flip that narrative. And of course, as I alluded to, Utah's now won 8 consecutive games. Every one of those is now in the Pac-12 era. Utah's in a Power 5 conference. BYU is a G5 team. So there's obviously the in-state bragging rights. But that game was interesting because going into the game, a lot of media and fans was asking Kyle Whittingham if he was going to rest some starters going into the Pac-12 title game, because those BYU games are usually really, really physical. Dudes get banged up, beat up, get really emotional. But he said, no, we're treating it like a regular game. And sure enough, every starter did play in the game. But for the first 2.5 to 3 quarters, Utah was sleepwalking through that game. They fell behind 20-0 at halftime. They just didn't have the fire and the intensity, whereas BYU, they came out all guns blazing. They were throwing haymakers left and right. It wasn't until near the end of the 3rd quarter, after Utah had a very nice sustained drive and got a touchdown pass to pull the lead from 27-7 to 27-14. That's when the energy in the stadium really picked up, and that's when you could kind of tell the players were like, hey, enough of this. And the next probably about 15 to 20 minutes of game time, Utah dominated. They finished the game on a 35-7 run. Once they really decided to end the game, they ended the game. They were fortunate that they woke up when they did, because BYU could have easily won that game. There was some very questionable decisions on their side of the field with some offensive play calling. They had some injuries, some attrition. But ultimately, when Utah decided to end it, they put an end to it. So 8 straight in the rivalry series, and it's getting really one-sided right now.
We're talking Utah football with the Utes taking on Washington for the Pac-12 championship Friday night. We've got Shane Roberts on the line from Block U. It's the SB Nation platform for Utah athletics. Shane, I was agonizing in the preseason because I always take my predictions down to like a day before kickoff in terms of my season-long predictions, because I was very convicted that Utah was the best team in the Pac-12 South and would be this year. But I looked at the schedule and you know better than I do that you had to play the most difficult schedule in the conference. That in comparing your schedule and who you drew from the North compared to some other teams, like, for example, USC didn't have to play Washington. Arizona didn't play anyone. I don't know how they make up these schedules, and they completely bypass, Washington State, or, on down the line. But anyway, you had to play all the tough teams from the North and missed Oregon State. So you had the most difficult path, and so it came down to me. Well, I think I think Utah is going to win the head-to-head against USC at home, and that's going to break a tie. And then it was very strange that I was looking at the standings prior to the Arizona State game, and you guys were in first place. And then I looked and saw Arizona State. Wow, they're only 2-3, but they win this game. They've got a tie. They propel themselves into a tie, and then they've got the tiebreaker. Could Arizona State possibly win this division? And so for a few weeks, it was in peril because Arizona State obviously beat you guys. But in the long run, you proved to be the best team.
Yeah, it was. Utah was set up to fail by the conference on so many levels. Before the season, obviously, me and people on my site, we usually go around and kind of prognosticate. And when you go game by game by game, I actually picked the Utes to go 11-1 because as I looked at each game in a silo, I figured Utah's better than this team, Utah's better than this team, Utah's better than this team. But then, as one of my counterparts, Alex, he's like, well, that's all well and good, but at the same time, not only did Utah play all the best teams in the Pac-12 North, but they also had 2 short week games, 2 Saturday to Friday games, a couple of them on the road. They're the only team in the league that I believe had back-to-back road games in multiple weeks. And I was like, ooh, yeah, you're right. That's a really tough road to hoe. But I had that conviction that Utah was better than SC. They were better than ASU. They were better than all these teams. But yeah, they were set up to fail. And then after starting 0-2 in conference, so losing to Washington and Washington State, things were looking pretty dicey. Albeit that Washington State game, Utah defensively was out of control. They shut them down. They just couldn't figure out how to score a point. Similar story against Washington State. They held Washington State to 28 points, I believe. And they really hemmed them in, but their second half game plan was really poor, and they let that game get away from them. The Stanford game, Utah figured it out. They put everything together. They ended up blowing Stanford out on the road. They scored over 40 points, 40-21, I believe. And then it was rolling from there. And then, as you alluded to, the Arizona State game happened. And then there's just something about Tempe. The moment that ASU week started, I just felt terrible about that game, just because going to Tempe, going to the desert, has just been historically terrible for the Utes. They got off the schneid there a few years ago, but they have Nikhil Harry, Benjamin. They have some dudes down there, and I just kind of figured there's some bad stuff formulating for the Utes. And sure enough, Tyler Huntley got knocked out of that game, broke his collarbone. The offense was very hit or miss. The defense struggled more so than they had struggled all season long. And sure enough, they lost that game, thus losing the tiebreaker to Arizona State. So we're all sitting up here in Salt Lake thinking we're going to have a 6-3 conference record. We're going to be 4-1 in the division. That one loss being to Arizona State, but we played Oregon, we played Stanford, we played at Washington, we played Washington State, and we're going to end up losing this thing. Fortunately, a couple of weeks ago, after we beat Colorado in a blizzard, we all turned into giant Oregon Ducks fans, which is hard to say. But we were rooting like crazy for the Ducks against Arizona State. And Oregon tried to lose that game so many times, but they pulled it out and clinched the division for the Utes. And you just could feel this giant monkey come off the back of every Utah fan, coach, and player. as they finally clinched the division and eventually rolled into that rivalry game. Yeah, it was a crazy schedule to begin with, to say the least.
And Shane, I think that's fortunate for College Football Nation because I've got no rooting interest in any of this, but I just see Utah and Washington as a much better game than Arizona State against Washington. You talked about the offense. The Northern Illinois game also comes to mind as being a brutal offensive performance. You mentioned the 7 points against Washington early. How has the offense developed with Tyler Huntley at quarterback?
Well, you could tell those first 4 games of the season, Utah was really just trying to try new things and try to figure some stuff out because they returned most of the offense from last season, and they'll actually return most of the offense going into the next season too. A lot of sophomores on this team, but they really figured out their identity with Zach Moss coming out of Northern Illinois, going into Washington State. They just started to ride Zach Moss the entire way. They've reestablished their identity as a run first power run team, and that's what they rolled with. And out of that, they were deadly in play action. A lot of tight end passing. Brenton Covey getting into the action, coming back from his 2-year Mormon mission. One of the telecasts that Utah was on, I think it was Brock Heward on ESPN. He was comparing Utah to the LA Rams because they run some very similar offensive sets, kind of this very unique bunch 2 tight end look, to where they'll have 2 tight ends at the end of the line, the running back right behind the quarterback under center, and they were deadly out of that set. They haven't done as much the last few weeks because, as I mentioned, Tyler Huntley went down against Arizona State, he broke his collarbone, so Jason Shelley came in the last 3 games. But the offense really hasn't changed under Shelley. He's very much a very similar quarterback. But a lot of us around Salt Lake have always said the defense has always been a championship level defense. Special teams have always been championship level. If Utah could ever figure out the offensive side of the ball, watch out. And sure enough, they're now in the top third of the Pac-12 in offensive efficiency, putting up plenty of yards, good points. And what happens? They're now in the Pac-12 championship game with an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl. So as long as they remember their identity of run the ball, pass, I want to say selectively, we're not talking like Navy here, but we're saying pass when it's needed, be very efficient in the passing game. Utah's a very hard team to beat when they're rolling.
Well, you mentioned, Shane, this offense being different with Zach Moss getting rolling after the Northern Illinois game, but he stopped rolling, unfortunately, after the Arizona State game. So here's a kid that's got 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns, but and was the known commodity on this offense starting the season. But he's done. You know what's going on from here in regards to generating a ground attack?
Yeah, the Moss thing, the Huntley and Moss was a 1-2 punch, losing both those guys. Right? Obviously, we lost Huntley in the Arizona State game. We lost Moss the subsequent days after the Arizona State game. And it sounds like just a freak injury, a pre-existing thing that his knee eventually just locked up on him, and he had to have knee surgery. But backing him up is Armand Shine. And Armand Shine was actually beat out Zach Moss 2 seasons ago. So he was a previously starting running back for the Utes, but he just completely destroyed his knee against Arizona a couple seasons ago at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Just blew it out. So he had to sit out the rest of that season. And then going into the last season, he had another injury, so he actually redshirted last year. So Utah had a proven starting running back sitting right behind Moss. Is he Zach Moss? No, he's not. Zach Moss just kind of has that different level than a lot of college running backs have. But Shine is a very damn good backup. Like I said, he'd probably start on a lot of P5 teams. And then behind Shine, you have TJ Green. He's a redshirt freshman out of Arizona. That kid has me super excited. He's very fast, very shifty, very elusive. But you can tell he's still trying to figure out the speed of the game. He likes to bounce it outside a lot instead of sticking his nose up in there. But once he figures it out, I think without a doubt, he's the future of Utah football at the running back position. But 2 very good running backs that backed up Moss. They're not Moss, but for all, for what happened, very pleased with what they have behind him.
Yeah, you mentioned the name Britton Covey. And when I was doing my preseason work, looking at the Utes and trying to get familiar with the personnel, and most of these names were familiar. And then I came across Covey and I was like, oh, yeah, that guy. He's been gone for 2 years. And he's coming back, and he caught like 45, 50 passes his last season in 2015. I see he caught 58 this year, about 10 yards per reception. And I'm looking through the numbers here, and I'm trying to think when I watched Utah play this year. Saw the UCLA game, saw a little bit of, for some reason, I think they relegated you to the Pac-12 network against USC.
Yeah, they did.
And so I was beside
Fox,
myself there
ESPN
because
bypassed us for
game.
that.
Other than that, yeah, I saw bits and pieces of other games. So anyway, I probably saw a total of 3 to 4 games. And are we looking at an offensive attack that we've grown accustomed to with Utah? When you mention efficiency, that's a great word, and that should be the focus or the goal of most offenses. But it's kind of a word that steers clear and makes people think, well, the offense isn't that dynamic. If their goal is to be efficient, is there more explosiveness to this offense, or is it a typical Utah offense where maybe that's the missing element on the perimeter?
No, there's some explosiveness to it for sure. Is it? I don't even know if I can dare say Oregon anymore, because Oregon's came back to the pack offensively.
Oklahoma,
but yeah. So the Oklahomas of the world, no, it's not. But they had plenty of playmakers. Obviously, Covey. If you see Covey, on the sidewalk, just walking down the street, you'd think he's just some dude. I mean, he's like a 5'9", just average looking Joe. But then once he gets on the football field, he makes dudes look stupid. He's elusive. He's hard to catch. He's at the top of almost every scouting report for any opponent, at least in terms of their passing game. They also have a couple of really young wide receivers. Solomon Enos, he's a true freshman out of Arizona. He had offers from almost everywhere around the country. He's made some huge plays this year. He's still figuring it out. Jason Shelley's high school teammate is also on the outside, Jalen Dixon. His average yards per catch is like 25 yards per catch. That dude is behind defenses all day long. And the tight end game has actually become very deadly for the Utes. Utah has 3 tight ends that they've targeted heavily over the season. You mentioned the UCLA game. Covey actually has a few touchdown passes because Utah likes to get a little creative. So they caught Covey coming around, and he threw a touchdown pass. And one of Utah's tight ends, Randy Moss, one of UCLA's defensive backs, just took it right off the top of his head. Very impressive athletic play for a freshman tight end. So there's some explosiveness to this offense for sure. In some games, they've actually kind of counted on it at times. Namely against like Oregon. They had to strike some really big plays to come back against Oregon after surrendering a lead in that game. They gashed USC up and down the field. They had 550 yards or something against USC. And that's an interesting thing, about Utah's offense and just their scoring differential in division games. They blew out almost everybody in the division, minus the one game against Arizona State. Utah's really figured something out on offense. There's no doubt about it. They still need a couple more guys on the outside for sure, but they've got some dudes there. Names that you might not be familiar with, but a lot of them are freshmen, a lot of them are sophomores. I think there's probably really 2 juniors on the team that are worth note, but everybody else is young. So it's going to take some time for those to become household names. Utah's not going to drop 60 on you, but they'll be pushing 40 a lot of weeks.
And we see it so many times, Shane, in these rematch games, is that the second edition turns out to be just a completely different game than the first edition. You would think, okay, same teams, they go out there, and the first team was 2 touchdowns better the first time, and they're going to be 2 touchdowns better the second time. Well, we learned that from watching college football week to week, that these, that if a team's like Utah 9-3, sure, we know that they're a good team and they're generally going to be competitive and win games, but still a different team shows up, and that's dependent on matchups as well. And especially in this case, if you're looking at no Moss this time, but you're also looking at an offense that's developed and turned out to be a better edition of what it was early in the season, in a 21-7 loss against Washington. So obviously you got to figure some things out offensively that you didn't the first time against what's probably arguably the best defense in the Pac-12.
Yeah, well, Utah and Washington are almost identical. Utah and Washington are ranked number 1 and number 2 in the Pac-12 in defense in every statistical category. Um, Even spectators watching this game will probably walk away with bruises and a torn ACL and a concussion. I mean, it's gonna be nasty. It's gonna be bruising, but um, the two teams are so similar to one another, and they've actually said that throughout this entire week. And actually, I would say for most of the season, Utah was actually probably the better team than Washington. Obviously, Washington got us up here at Rice Eccles, but Utah was still figuring stuff out. There was some serious issues going on offensively for Utah at that time. But once the Utes got that figured out, they rolled and they've won 7 of 8 games after that Washington State game. So yeah, they've been rolling and they've been playing extremely well. Obviously, the game plan against Washington is going to be very unique because I believe they said at the press conference on Monday that this is the first time that Utah is going to have a rematch with an opponent since like the 40s. So everybody's very curious of what kind of game plan is Kyle Whittingham going to have for the Huskies. How are they going to attack them differently than they attacked them in the first game? There's a lot of unknowns. Kyle Whittingham has such a sterling bowl record at 11-1 as a head coach. That can he kind of factor this kind of like a bowl game? Not really, because it's not the extended wait. But I would expect Utah's defense to come out with their hair on fire. First and foremost, trying to shut down Myles Gaskin. That dude's a stud. Let Jake Browning. If Jake Browning beats him, you just salute and say, good luck. Because they got to Browning like crazy in the first matchup. He threw an interception to a defensive lineman. He was just all over the field. So. Yeah, offensively is the key. If Utah can generate the points, which I think they can, but it's going to be an uphill battle. But that's going to be the key. Can they establish the line of scrimmage? Can they run the ball? If they run the ball, I think they'll be in good shape.
Got Shane Roberts on the line from the Block U. It's the SB Nation platform for Utah football. And one last thing here, Shane. I'm guessing, because this is the mentality of sports fans and the mentality of people that have a certain group of members of anything, and then there's an outsider that comes in, and even 5 years down the road, well, they're still kind of the outsider. So for the Pac-12, that's Utah and it's Colorado. So there has to be some semblance of some degree of satisfaction in breaking in as a non-Power 5 and then showing that you belong. Now, obviously, you showed you belong quite a long time ago after like the first season or two, but to win the championship would have to mean something maybe even more significant than for a lot of teams.
Yeah, well, it'd be huge. I don't think that goes without saying. Obviously, the goal this season, the entire time, was to win the Pac-12 South, because I don't know how many Utah fans, if you had a drinking game for every time a commentator said Utah was the only team not to win the South, we'd all be dead. So to get the monkey off the back for that is huge. But I think winning, there's 2 conference championships out there that I think are extremely special, and for one reason alone, and I'll tell you why. It's the Pac-12 championship, it's the Big Ten championship, because at the end of the day, what's the reward? It's the Rose Bowl. Very few people can say you've been to the Rose Bowl, you've won the Rose Bowl. And for a quote-unquote outsider like Utah to get invited to the Pac-12 and to have an opportunity to win the conference and play in a Rose Bowl, obviously we'd love to be in the conversation for college football playoff, national championship. That's all well and good. But if you're not in that conversation, you want to be in the conversation for the Rose Bowl. The granddaddy of them all, January 1st, San Gabriel's, the whole 9 yards. And that's really since about the middle part of the season, when things started to formulate and to come into focus a little bit, said, Utah might win this division. Everybody started saying, we just need a chance in one game to go to the Rose Bowl. So it's been Rose Bowl or bust for the last 3 or 4 weeks. That's as you say that around this community, everybody lights up, everybody gets super excited, everybody's thinking plane tickets, hotel, the whole 9 yards. So if Utah can find their way to win the Pac-12 championship, go to the Rose Bowl, you'll see the whole, well, at least the Salt Lake Valley, almost elevate, because everybody will be out of their heads excited to be able to represent the Pac-12 and go to that conference, to go to the Rose Bowl and play either Michigan or probably Michigan or Ohio State. I don't see Northwestern ending up there one way or the other. So that would be that's a dream scenario for the Utes outside of playing for a national title.
Jim Harbaugh's first game at Michigan, Shane, of course, knows. We will remind people out there, if you don't know, that Jim Harbaugh's first game in 2015 at Utah, like a 7-point loss, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that was actually a gifted last touchdown too. It was actually fairly pretty decent, pretty comfortable game for the last half of the game. They rallied to get it within that last score.
All right, always a good discussion with Shane Roberts from the Block U, Utah's platform on SB Nation as they get set for their showdown with Washington for the Pacific 12 championship. Shane, I made contact with you on email. I will get back to you on that, but I appreciate you stopping by.
Not a problem. Thanks, Mark. Anytime.